Amit and Jay.
Hey, Chip, thanks for having us. Jay, you there?
Yeah.
I am here.
Hey, guys. All right, I'm going to step out and let you guys have at it.
Awesome. Yeah, Jay needs no introduction, but I'm still going to do a formal one and an informal one shortly. So Jay leads Forrester's research and advisory for global channels, alliances and partnerships, aka ecosystems. That's the formal piece. The informal is that he's known as the godfather of ecosystems, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But what a fabulous bank of thought leadership. Jay was named 2021 Channel Influencer of the Year by Channel Partners Magazine, top 40 under 40 by Business Review, top 8 thought leader by Channel Marketing Journal, and so on and so on. You know, Jay, your parents must be tremendously proud. Your family must be tremendously proud of your thought leadership and influence in the industry. So say hello to our audience here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be in front of such a big group of ecosystem leaders. I learn from them every day, and I monitor the chatter and things like that. So I just try to pull some of that together and connect the dots.
Absolutely. And Jay, very quickly, right, we are getting right into the meat of the ecosystems topic. Alliances, channels, partnerships, you've called this the decade of the ecosystem. Actually, get right to it. Why is this important right now in this very moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. Before we kicked off the call, I mentioned the Bill Gates quote that we tend to overestimate what we're going to do in the next 2 years and underestimate what we're going to do in the next 10. So when you take, decade-long looks at our industry, I look back to the first decade, in 1999, for example, in software, when Salesforce.com got their start, we started thinking about the sales tech stack. If you were a salesperson back then, you went into that decade managing your territory with your gut. You went into that decade thinking you were born to be a salesperson. Well, a few years later, you couldn't get a job without deep CRM skills. You couldn't, lead a sales team without managing those territories to the 7th decimal point. And you exited the decade much differently than you came in. At the time, a lot of people don't know this, but there was 350 CRM companies. And Salesforce took a lead. Today, it's a Dow 30 company. They're charging towards $1 trillion valuation and a bunch of other things. But back then, they were just one of 350. In the next decade, it was the decade of direct marketing. And we started out in small companies at that time, like Eloqua and Marketo. There was Pardot and HubSpot and Acton and other small companies. They were on a tech stack at the time. Nobody would recognize those names until companies like Oracle and Salesforce and Adobe started making acquisitions. But you walked into that decade as a marketing person thinking that 50% of your marketing dollars were wasted. You just didn't know which 50%. That was really funny back then at cocktail parties. Well, it got less funny a few years later when you couldn't get a job in marketing without deep marketing automation and MarTech skills, the 8,000 logos on that MarTech stack. And you exited the decade with, your campaigns, your levers and dials managed to the 7th decimal point. Very, very different. And, back to those 150 marketing automation companies at the start of the decade, the company that came out 4th place in the decade went public and is today worth $32 billion. It's HubSpot. And guess what HubSpot is? It's a platform and ecosystem company. They hired Scott Brinker, who actually authored that 8,000 logo MarTech stack. And that's where we are. So now we go into the decade of the ecosystem. I happen to make the channel tech stack over my shoulder. And, a bunch of people are asking, companies like WorkSpan and others, is this the new HubSpot? Could WorkSpan come in 4th place this decade and be worth $32 billion as a public company? And the answer is, some of the questions we're getting in chat is early in this decade, how do you get the tools? How do you get the technology? How do you go ask your superiors who may not be connecting the dots at this point? Well, I think we're in that span right now where we're just turning that over, and you will not be able to get a job as a channel account manager, as an alliance manager, somebody in the partnerships ecosystem without those 7 decimal point level accuracy of how you do this. And that's why I'm so excited about this decade of the ecosystem.
Well, this is fantastic vision that you're painting here. Certainly live it. And, in this decade, as you're saying, the channel is in transformation, the alliances are in transformation, the various, modes of routes to market are actually in transformation. So talk a little bit about the larger market forces that are driving this change, especially to channel and to distribution and to how companies partner up together, and why this accountability and seventh decimal point is kind of important at this stage now.
Yeah, so there's a number of trends. Every year I come out with my David Letterman top 10 list of predictions and things like that. So many of the trends we were watching, for example, before the pandemic, ended up getting put on steroids during the pandemic. So we've been watching this buyer, the new buyer. We have almost 2/3 of our audience today in software companies, and software is eating the world. We have every company in every industry becoming a software company. So in that space, we've got a very, very different buyer. We've all looked at the research around these digital and digital-only journeys they're now on. We're studying the psychology and behavior changes. We know that in 4 years, our majority buyer will be a millennial. So it's not just psychology changes, there's demographic changes that we're going after, but here it is. In the software world, we've got all kinds of models at play. One of the most successful companies during the pandemic was Zoom. They're a product-led growth company, PLG. So they don't have channel resellers as normal, but they definitely are a platform ecosystem company building out tens and soon to be hundreds of thousands of partnerships and working in this space. You look at subscription and consumption models. I'm excited to hear from HPE right after this because they were one of the pioneers. They started working on this 7 or 8 years ago. We've been hearing GreenLake for 3 or 4 years now. They're multi-years ahead of their competition. They've had some followers like Cisco went all in ecosystem, subscription consumption models. Dell with Apex went all in. Even last week, Lenovo, a company I worked at for 17 years along with IBM, went all in. So this is a complete change in front of this new buyer. We've got usage-based pricing and value-based pricing, and marketplaces grew more in 3 months last year than the last 10 years combined. So there are 5 models there that all present headwinds against resell. And I'll remind you, in the $3.5 trillion that businesses and governments spend in the tech industry, 64% of it today is resold. So in the new cloud world, in the SaaS space and the infrastructure and the platform spaces, it's somewhere about 20 to 30%. So we're disconnecting from this linear supply chain of multi-tier distribution of the ways that our go-to-market and routes to market strategies were in the past. We're getting more obsessed about the buyer. We're getting obsessed over those 28 digital moments that take them from problem to vendor selection. We're getting obsessed over subscription models, which renew every 30 days forever. And we're starting to rewrite the gold, silver, bronze programs we've had for 40 years. We're starting to trifurcate our channel incentives and the way we execute as teams, as people, as processes and programs, and especially technology underneath it. This is all the triggers, and it all wraps around this new buyer.
What a fantastic insight. These larger market forces certainly are shifting from fundamental resell to things like co-sell, where there's more flexibility in terms of different business models. There's also a lot of change in how companies are co-innovating with one another. David, for example, with GreenLake, you can put different kinds of Lego blocks together. With SAP, Carl is speaking later, talking about building on SAP Business Technology Platform and extending application solution. How is the nature of co-innovation, Jay, changing with platform and PLG around to include partners?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something as an analyst, I get paid to count. So I tried to go back and look at all of the different things around the buyer, but try to take it that last mile. The channel, as we've defined it, has always been that last mile. Let's take a product from HPE or let's take a product from SAP and go plumb that into a particular use case. And when you look at software, it gets very interesting. First of all, the 65% of software today is bought outside of IT. Now, this has actually been a little bit of a struggle for companies like SAP and HPE that grew up in a world that they call on the CIO or the CISO or the CTO or the CD. Now, the VP of marketing in many companies spends more money on technology than the head of technology. So companies have had to look at themselves and reframe how they do that at scale. But if 2/3 of all software sales are happening in the lines of business, that's a big change. So now I've got 12 buyers there, marketing and sales and operations and finance and HR and others that are leading the technology digital transformations. We used to push our partners to be industry experts. Go get a vertical, healthcare, go be a healthcare expert in your region. Well, customers aren't at that level anymore. They're at the sub-industry. Yeah. You may be a healthcare expert. You might be in the US and know a lot about HIPAA and high-tech compliance, but I run a mid-sized clinic with 50 doctors. So your dentist office or your small hospital skills don't apply here. I want to plumb in my last mile at that level of granularity. So there are 297 examples of sub-industries. Again, regionally, if I'm talking to mid-sized clinics, it changes state by state, province by province, and country by country. You can't transport skills across, state or country lines that easily. It's a completely different ballgame. Next, the sector size and segment. The 50 doctors is really, really important because the resources, the skills, the execution that a mid-sized clinic would have would be just so much different than a more of a mid-market sized or a larger, health organization would have. So we stare at all those different nuances from SMB right up to the enterprise. And then finally, this industry used to be based on hardware, software, and services. Well, today we track 26 categories and 250 categories below that. So no one partner has broad skills across even the 26 or the 250. So what you do is this end of this single throat to choke or the trusted advisor, and the average customer through their journey will have at least 5 partners. Wow. So the level of orchestration around that, the level of serving, if you multiply those 5 vectors together, by the way, it's 35 million different buying journeys that you need to support. And the last time I checked, you're not writing 35 million ebooks. You're not recording 35 million podcasts, even though Chip is close. It's just an unbelievably large and complex set of permutations that partnerships are the only way that you can actually serve that last mile today.
What a fantastic insight. And this kind of supports the observation that we see that channel partners are, creating IP for their last mile, the 35 million routes that you're talking about. Services SI partners are packaging their services into offerings and resembling more the appification of services that we see. And alongside are the revenue models of, building joint solutions that can go any which way if you want, right? Either sold through a marketplace or co-sold together.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big changes, and again, one of the big triggers of the decade of the ecosystem is the quantification of an ecosystem. And the company that got there first was Salesforce. And they came out to market and said, for every $1 we sell, there's $4.65 available to partners of all types. There's 16 different kinds of partners. So if you come in as an integrator, if you come in as an ISV, an MSP, a VAR, a consultant, an agency, an accountant, whoever you are and whatever model you run, there is almost a 5-time multiplier you can chase. Let us break it down for you. How much of that is, implementation versus integration, security and compliance and continuity and data and automation. We'll break it all down for you in granular detail so that you can see, and hopefully with co-selling and co-marketing, we can give you the confidence, help you build your business practice, give you the skills, give you the certifications and competencies, but give you the confidence for every $1 that we sell to go ask the customer for $2 or $3. Right. And there's been a fast follow here where, Microsoft, the CEO goes in magazines and talks about unlocking trillions of dollars for the ecosystem. You've got companies like Google Cloud is at $5.32. Again, granular detail. And finally, even HubSpot, which I mentioned earlier, is at $5.80. A huge opportunity for digital agencies, marketing agencies that are changing their business models. They're becoming tech companies too. 78% of digital agencies now lead with tech services. and you have to go, deeper into their website to find out that they also have creative and concierge stuff. And the biggest number, they all point to HubSpot as, a company that's helping them make that transition. So that $5.80 becomes really interesting to the ecosystem, and a better a company can do to quantify it to the decimal point and help you as a partner build your company around the opportunity for the next decade, or where the winners and losers are going to be.
Absolutely. And certainly Carl is coming on next from SAP. We'll talk to him about the ecosystem value around SAP. What a tremendous ecosystem. I believe they're somewhere around $10 for every dollar SAP creates. So all in all, an awesome example. Mayank talked about this multi-partner ecosystem, right? As opposed to, let's say, talk about a company kind of speaking to the megaphone as a portal, let's say, but there's a new model evolving where it is a multi-party ecosystem. What's your take on this market and this emerging thing?
Yeah, a few years ago, I called it the trifurcation of the channel. And again, for 40 years, it's August 12th, 1981, kind of that first IBM PC, that first channel, and how we've evolved the B2B tech channel since then. But, if you look backwards, everything has revolved around the transaction. All of our programs were funded inside that transaction. Everything was the program. Well, in this new buyer, in these elongated buying journeys, especially with this move to subscription and consumption, that transaction is the first 30 days with the customer. I always use the example, your HPE server, deal that was $1 million is $9,000 a month forever. So first of all, if you're the reseller of that deal, that first 30 days, whatever margin you're getting isn't going to pay the mortgage. It's a complete change in how you go to market. But HPE, started to look to the left. So did SAP. They start to look to the left of that activity and said, with 51% of buyers getting to vendor selection without ever talking to a salesperson. And if we're not in those 28 moments from a direct marketing perspective, they never come by our website, they never read one of our ebooks, we may lose a deal without ever knowing there was a deal. So now these companies are getting obsessed over those 28 moments. By the way, the owners of those 28 moments, the author of the ebook, the hoster of that podcast, are and should be potential partners in the ecosystem. And they're not going to be transacting partners. They could be, some sort of referral fee or finder's fee, but in most cases, they actually don't accept funds. They're there early in the journey to win some business later in the journey, in part of that multiplier I talked about. But now, you've shifted a third of your focus before the initial transaction, to get that customer to the dance. Now you got to keep dancing, because every 30 days forever, you've got to renew that customer, the lifetime value. We're all going to be rated as companies like Netflix. Who cares about revenue? Who cares about profit? How many subscribers? And what's your churn rate? That's the numbers we're going after here. So in this new model, who is out there helping me drive adoption? Adoption equals renewals. Who's out there doing deeper integrations, driving stickiness? Who's out there doing upsell, cross-sell, and enrichment every 30 days? So now I'm shifting a third of my focus after the point of transaction. So now where I was spending $1 at the point of transaction, maybe I'm spending 33 cents now. I'm spending 33 with those early influencers. And now I'm spending 33 cents post-transaction to keep that a customer for life. So that's a completely different model. Yeah. When you talk about partnerships, I said at the end of the single throat to choke, or that trusted advisor, the average customer now, multi-industry, multi-geography, has 5 different important partners that are there during the different stages of their journey, which obviously never ends. So how to orchestrate those 5 partners and how to help them achieve that ecosystem multiplier becomes critical in terms of how you run your program.
Yeah, what a great insight. As we'll be talking to Carl later today, he's similar to what you just described. He's talking about the LACE model, where we want to go after the buying cycle into adoption and renewal. And previously at Ecosystem Business Summit, I'm just connecting the dots. Tracy and Palmer at VMware, they've shifted their incentive structure to actually mirror the customer lifecycle. So a lot of folks used to pay incentives to channel partners just at the time of deal registration or actually closing the deal. Now they're looking beyond the deal, which is adoption. Did the customer deploy it? There's an incentive for that. Did they fully consume the license? There's an incentive for that. And did they renew it? Because it relies so much on that last mile partner to renew, then the incentive is proportionately given at that time. So single dollar that used to be given upfront is now being actually stretched out throughout the buying life cycle, if you will. And
there's another interesting layer to this that's happening now, and another trigger to the decade of the ecosystem is the end of cookies, the end of targeting, the end of tracing. So Apple and Google are all in now on the end of tracking you and your privacy data. Mm-hmm. So this is interesting because those two companies happen to have 99% mobile share, and those two companies happen to have 86% browser share on the desktop and laptop. So there's a good chance that your partner and your customer are getting to the internet through one of those two companies. So what you've relied on in the past, this last decade of direct marketing, is a whole bunch of thousands of companies that harvested your privacy data and gave some visibility into those early 28 moments. Well, that's quickly evaporating. And over the course of the next 18 months, I think that not only the CMO, but the board is going to walk over to some of these ecosystem chiefs and have the conversation. We need, those 28 moments. I need to know who the owners are. They need to be part of our program. They need to know enough to be dangerous. They need to, be endorsing us through that. But we also need to be sharing data with them, because the only visibility we get early in the journey is now going to come through partnerships. It's not going to come through our MarTech stack. And if we don't have the technology to do that at scale, there can't be humans, tracking this. And if we don't get in early in the cycle, we know we don't win. And so every company, HPE, SAP, and every company down the line, right down to a startup, will tell you, the earlier they get in front of a customer, the better their chances of winning. Everyone knows the correlation. So now partnerships become paramount in terms of getting into those early moments. And that's where money's going to flow as well. There are hundreds of millions of dollars being spent trying to get to this third-party data and second-party data and things like that. Well, this new era of attribution of activities that happened before the transaction and after, this new era of data sharing in a secure and scalable way, which has automation and AI, not humans, tracking it, will become part of the horizontal platform of the decade of the ecosystem.
Wow. And this ties directly with what Mayank was saying around this ecosystem data hub having, data from directly from your partner. So in a way, the second party data is going to replace a lot of that cookie information that's going to evaporate shortly. And our own data, Jay, just to share it very candidly, we've seen that the partner given referrals actually close at a much higher rate. So it's not just that the marketing, the cookie information is going to evaporate and hence you lose connection through the marketing stack, but you're connecting to a partner stack with the similar or better information that converts much better, right? So that might be a very, very interesting argument to make in shifting dollars towards partner marketing as opposed to, let's say, direct marketing.
Yeah, there's an important piece here, though, is that we don't talk enough about, which is the size of ecosystems. In the days of transactional partners, we wanted to hone in on those platinum partners and do more and hit home runs with a smaller amount, where today it's actually the opposite theory. It's a Moneyball, theory, where I want to hit more singles. And I have to have an inclusive, larger ecosystem to make sure I'm handling 35 million potential customers times 28 moments times, the numbers are big. Yeah. So in this world now, we're seeing companies that are studying this and quantifying it. I mentioned Salesforce earlier. They went and looked at it and they said, for that early influence for whatever clouds that they're in today, the sales, marketing, customer success, things like Tableau and MuleSoft, and now recently Slack, for those things that they're trying to win, they sized it with us at Forrester at 250,000 partners that they're actively recruiting, so that they have a room, they're in the room, they're at that table of those 5 partners, and that they are actively influencing earlier and obviously later in the journey. a company like Microsoft, which you mentioned earlier, is recruiting 400 new partners every single day. It's the biggest channel of any industry in the world. They have 470,000 active partners, but they're adding over 10,000 a month, over 100,000 a year on top of that. And by the way, back to Salesforce, they shut down their resale program. They looked at their marketplace and said, every dollar shall flow there. So we're not looking for resellers. We're actually looking only before the point of transaction and after the point of transaction, and to all of our alliances and to all of our consultants and to all of this broad ecosystem to drive the future of the company. Just interesting in terms of the numbers we're seeing have extra zeros and extra commas than we would have been talking about even a couple of years ago.
Wow. Wow. What a fantastic time we live in, Jay. I have one last question and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So we always get a lot. I already see 6-7 questions lined up for you. So, you know, let's talk a little bit about the organization of partnering. You know, previously we, you know, now we are seeing really strategic leaders step into, you know, partnering, like, you know, David and Carla, good examples of that, but also this chief partner officer organization emerging. What's your take on that, and what is your advice to professionals who are entering this decade of ecosystem, if you can give that?
Yeah, we get a little bit of an inside view of this, which is interesting. And keep in mind that an ecosystem, you know, includes both transactional and non-transactional partners. You know, we're not doing away with the channel as it's been and as it's going. I mentioned 64% of this industry goes through the channel. We're not shutting that down in replacement of the decade of the ecosystem. It becomes part of it. And those people over the course of, you know, the last 40 years that run the best programs, that they're the most visible, the most endearing channel chiefs out there, will have a very strong role in this ecosystem. But I don't think, and what we've seen so far, I don't think they're going to be the leader of the ecosystem. The leader of the ecosystem is more of an alliance skill set. It's this idea of, you know, creating these co-innovation partnerships. You looked at it on your flywheel. Building out these value creation partnerships, 1 + 1 = 3. It's the ability to handle, you know, 16 different kinds of business model types, find a place in the ecosystem where they feel at home, continue to nurture them through programs, you know, onboarding them, educating, training, certifying, building competencies, incenting, motivating, driving loyalty. You got to, you know, co-sell, co-market, enable. So there's still 100 elements, but you lose the financial benefit of transaction because there's no gross to nets. There's no money in the deal to fund it anymore. So back when I talked about the head of sales, head of marketing, managing to the 7th decimal point in front of the board, in front of the CFO, the head of ecosystems needs to join that conversation and be there. Instead of hiring a new salesperson for 150,000, instead of running an SEO campaign for 150,000, give the 150,000 to me. I will drive a return faster. I will drive it more sticky and more long-term. And there'll be much more amplification to that return to the betterment of the business. And right now, we don't have enough skilled partner officers in that room competing for those dollars. And this will be the sea change in the next couple of years as companies start to make these changes and hire the right people that can have that business. And I love this as the ecosystem business session today, because that's such a key word of this, of being in that boardroom.
Yeah, that gives us goosebumps, because if the chief partner officers can say that if you give me $1 more, I can build a better joint solution, I can co-market with bigger amplification. And guess what? I can co-sell with a partner with much higher win rate than we have seen traditionally. So what a great argument to make. With that, I want to open it up to the audience for questions. So raise your hand, Chip, come in, and I see 6-7 questions on the comments as well. I'll ask the first one while you filter the rest. Larry is asking Jay, the traditional way of thinking gold, silver, bronze partners kind of outdated a little bit, right? So as people are building joint business plans with partners and you meet the partner wherever they are, question for you is, what's your take on this traditional, you know, tiering of partners, and how should you think about partnering in this new decade?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't want to say it's outdated. Again, 64% of this industry is resold. a successful ecosystem will have some level of tiered gold, silver, bronze, or points model to manage transactional partners. You know, a partner who sells 1 million versus a partner who sells 100,000 versus a partner that shows up once every 3 years needs to be segmented in the ways that you apply your programs, your incentives, the way you do your capacity planning and coverage mapping. Those skills, those muscles continue on. So again, there's no replacement here of that, but the view of the ecosystem, looking to the left, looking to the right, looking into this broader conversation, says that we're not going to, it's more difficult now to tier partners. You know, some companies early in the ecosystem game have tried to do it by competencies. And that's difficult because in the early influence game, I don't know how much competency I need to say something nice about you in my podcast. So I don't need to be, double black belt, certified to say that. So it's this realization that it is like the charts that you showed. I mean, it is a massive celestial view of things. And it's making sure, every partner can provide their value and co-innovate, and you can recognize all of that without trying to slot them somewhere. Here you are, and here's what you've got to get to the next level. It's got to be a piece of software like WorkSpan that can, orchestrate all of these moving parts. And that becomes more of the telescope inside this celestial model, trying to align stars and moons and drive value out of it, than trying to, give somebody a little badge they can put on their website and on their business card.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Jay. Chip, more questions, please.
Yeah. Great session, Jay. And by the way, thanks for the little shout out for Ecosystem Aces podcast earlier. So Brian Detweiler, hey Brian, good to see you. So Brian says, how do you balance creating attractive revenue for your ecosystem without creating too high a TCO for your technology that would negatively impact the customer and negatively impact competitive comparisons by new target customers, avoiding too much extra cost piggybacking your technology sale? Good.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one, I mentioned I sold into client server for 17 years. The thing we would never talk about, it's like Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is you would never talk about TCO. It was actually so bad in those days that an entire industry got started called managed services. And where 23% of companies decided to outsource some or all of their IT because patching and help desk and support and break fix, all that was just so terrible that an entire, $200 billion industry got its start 20 years ago. Well, all of a sudden now we've got companies, jumping over each other to share what their TCO is. Hey, if you're buying $100,000 of my product, you better have $500,000 in the bank or it's not going to work. You think, well, that's kind of a strange way to, kick off your keynote in front of your customers. Well, it's every company's becoming a tech company. We're starting to, like I mentioned, those big numbers of partners coming into, big companies like HPE and SAP. Many of those new partners, by the way, are customers that have developed some workflow. They've developed some last mile that they can actually also take to a larger market themselves. That's part of their opportunity growth. So in the idea of ecosystems now, everyone is involved. I mean, back to Salesforce, they called it Ohana, where it's just, I don't care if you're a customer. I don't care if you're an employee. I don't care if you're a partner. Actually, we don't care who you are. Here's your entry to the trailhead. And here's your entry point into the ecosystem. And we're all equal. And, in the morning, you're a customer. At noon, you're, a partner. In the afternoon, you're, an ISV out selling software. And then the next morning you get acquired and you're an employee. So this idea that in an ecosystem, again, there's a lot of moving planets and star systems and rotation and gravity. And we can't get caught up with trying to label people or companies, because as we know, given this time tomorrow, that could change.
Yeah. And Jay, Manoj Bhatia from Verizon is asking, to your point just now, had a David versus Goliath dilemma while working on a large, small company dynamic and co-sell. Your thoughts on how to make key stakeholders, sponsors understand this better or understand this partnering challenge better? What's your advice on small versus large co-sell?
Well, the great thing is, I mentioned a lot of examples in these decades of Davids becoming Goliaths. along the way and doing it as a platform ecosystem way. But keep it in mind, like if you're thinking about marketplaces, for example, sometimes you are involved in somebody else's marketplace. GreenLake will be acquired, via AWS. But in a lot of other cases, it'll be the customer starting at HPE and acquiring AWS technology there. So it doesn't really matter how the money changes hands. It will probably happen more digitally than ever before. But in this case, there are on average 6 other pieces of software bought with every SaaS or infrastructure dollar spent. So if I am David, if I am somebody who's built, a pretty unique last mile type of solution for that mid-sized clinic, I can leverage the power of HPE or SAP or others in their marketplaces and draft off of them. I might be Pluto, but still they need to buy a Pluto to end their solution. And then I can, graduate myself upwards. And as I gain revenue, as I gain strength, I can build off. I'm not going to maybe compete directly with SAP. I don't see too many companies putting up their hands saying that, no, that's a good business strategy.
Yeah.
But I can also build out my own ecosystem. And, HubSpot going from a name we've never heard of a decade ago to a $32 billion company, you can do that pretty fast.
And there are so many questions, Jay, for you. If you don't mind, can you look at the chat and potentially respond to some of the questions directly put into you while we pivot to our next session?
I will do that.
That'll be phenomenal. Thank you so much. This was like the most insight-packed, 45 minutes we could imagine.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jay.
Jay, thank you.